Hey, everyone. Thank you. Thanks for attending our webinar on the role of the technology coordinator in the Connecticut SAT school day. So again, thanks for attending. I know everyone's very busy. So if you have actually participated in this last year, if you were the technology coordinator, we really haven't made any big changes. So that's probably good for you. And if you're new, you have a lot of we have a lot of resources for you on how to get up to speed. If you're familiar with testing on NGSS or Smarter Balance, the system is very similar because we use Cambium, but there are some differences because it is the College Board system. So my name is Michelle Rosado, and I work at the Connecticut Department of Education, and I'm joined by my colleague, Deirdre Ducharme, and my colleague, Adrian Cupper from the College Board. And then we have a special guest who's going to share best practices, Julie from Enfield High School. So we'll get to her part in a little bit. So thanks for attending. And just as a reminder, this session is being recorded and we will be posting it to the Connecticut SAT School Day resources page. And there's a link to that up there. The slides are actually currently posted to that page. I have put them also into the files section of the Teams meeting, although I know that sometimes there's limitations on whether you can access those files or not, but they are in there in this. And then there's our contact information. And just to call out, we have a new email that's dedicated to Connecticut on the College Board side, and that's ctsat@collegeboard.org. Right. And you could see that we had Stella, my Yorkie, in the first slide. And then we had one of Adrian's cats in the next slide. So, all right. So if you didn't know about this, there's going to be a new digital version of the College Board SAT, and actually the whole suite of assessments, PSAT, SAT, PSAT 10. Everything's going digital for the College Board. They've been developing their own digital system. It's not going to be delivered using the same platform that we used last year and this year. And so there's going to be some more information that we're going to be having, some webinars and things like that. But for your purposes, if you administer PSAT in the fall, that will now be digital beginning in the fall of 2023. And then the Connecticut SAT will be going digital beginning in spring of 2024. So lots of information coming out, but you could take a look on the College Board's website right now. Under the new digital test, not to be confused with the current digital test that we're using, but there are a lot of resources up there. And if you're not aware of that, here's the test dates. It's a window that we give you so you can choose whatever dates you want to administer. And you can do your makeup testing within the March dates. You don't have to wait until April to use those makeup dates. In some ways, it's a little bit easier if you just test everyone in March, but you're certainly more than able to use the dates in April as well. Okay, so is this where we're transitioning? Okay, good. And I just want to reiterate, like, the role of the technology coordinator, as far as like we're concerned, is to assist your test coordinator in the building with getting the devices ready for testing, downloading the secure browser, making sure that your technology, the bandwidth, testing that out, and things like that. I'm sure within each district, there might be slightly different roles that you might take on in this role of tech coordinator, but just like in an overarching manner, that's what the role of the technology coordinator is. So I'm going to turn it over to Adrian.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. So hi, everybody. It's great to be back with you again this year. So I'm going to just talk through an overview of the CAI systems, and we're just going to talk through the main points that technology coordinators need to be aware of to support schools to test. Towards the end of this, we'll have a few kind of frequently asked questions of technology coordinators, so you have that information. But as Michelle said, as we go through this, you are more than welcome to put any questions that you may have in the chat, and we'll answer them either kind of we'll either respond back in the chat, or depending on what it is, we may need to discuss it kind of in the course of the presentation at the end. Okay, so so we'll get started. So the CAI, we use the Cambium systems, the CAI systems, to administer our digital SAT. As Michelle did mention, this is the last year we're using the CAI systems. When we launch our new digital SAT moving forward, after this season, we will be using our own system. But for the purpose of the spring 2023 Connecticut SAT, we are continuing to use the CAI systems, which is the same as what we did last year. So as Michelle mentioned, if you did this last year, this is going to be basically the same for you moving forward this year. If you're new, we've got a bunch of information for you. There's lots of folks in Connecticut that can support you as well. So let me see here. Let's just talk about there are three applications that are part of the CAI digital test delivery system. There is the test information distribution engine, that's TIDE. And this is what test coordinators really use throughout the testing process. This is where you see students. This is where you add proctors so that they can administer the test. This is where you do a lot of your work. You set, this is where a test coordinator would set their accommodation settings for students with testing with accommodations. So this is like the test coordinator's main hub. Then there's the test administrator, or the TA interface. That is the application that the proctors will use on test day to administer the test to students. And so that gives them the kind of holistic view of what's happening in their testing room. And then there's the secure browser, and the secure browser is what students use to take the test. And so that's how they see test content, and that is how they are able to provide their answers and ultimately end up with a score for the test. So we'll talk a little bit more detail here about the three applications. As I mentioned, TIDE is the system that test coordinators will use as their kind of main way to manage data and configure test settings ahead of test day. And then district administrators, who are also kind of supporting schools as part of the Connecticut SAT School Day, will also have access to TIDE to support those test coordinators as they manage student data. I'm sorry, that moved ahead without me wanting to do that. So TIDE, in TIDE, test coordinators can create staff accounts. They can manage rosters. They can manage digital test sessions. They can modify test settings for students with accommodations. And they can print student test tickets. So that all happens within the TIDE system. And then within the test administrator interface, as I said, this is what proctors will use to administer the digital SAT. In the TA interface, proctors can conduct pre-administration sessions. They create test sessions. They approve students to come into and join the test sessions. They use it to monitor the students that are taking the test and manage test timing, and they monitor student test status in the TA interface, so they'll be able to see the status of all students, and that will help them identify students who may need assistance. Then we have the CAI, the secure browser. Students use the secure browser to access and take the test. So this is how students will actually see test content. Schools are required to download and install the secure browser on all student test-taking devices. So it secures the desktop. It restricts access to other prohibited applications while the student is testing, and then collects the student responses so that we can score them and provide the students with their score. In the secure browser, students will use their registration number. When they'll have to enter their registration number, not their SAS. That they enter their registration number into the secure browser to be able to take the test.
And they get that from their test tickets that you print.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah. So
yes.
I wanted to let you know that Aisa was on here in case, and she can unmute herself and share if you wanted her to. So
great. So I will reach out. I will call your name if we need your help. So okay, great. So we're going to move on and talk about kind of preparing for digital testing. So for how to make sure that your schools are ready to give the digital test. So the first thing I want to call out is that there are a number of digital testing resources available in our digital testing portal. Now, if you were to go on the the Connecticut resource page that Michelle had kind of called out earlier for testing, they actually have links to the most relevant of documents right there. So, you can use that to link to the most relevant documents. But if you need more information, you can come to the digital testing portal. That's also where you can send it to Tide. It's where you can access practice the digital preview and the student digital test experience, the preview of that. And then within the resources on the digital testing portal, there is a tab that is for digital preparedness. And this provides the kind of steps that you should make sure you've taken to make sure that your schools are ready ready technically to give the test. And so on this tab, you'll see kind of information that is useful, as well as kind of a clear sense of the steps you need to make sure you take. And there's one other digital readiness resource we want to call out here. This is the Digital Testing Room Quick Start Guide. The Digital Testing Room's Quick Start Guide is really designed to help your proctors and really on test day, so that as people are getting started with their work on test day, this provides a quick and easy way for them to do that. This is available online, and this is also something we send in the shipment of digital test materials that we send out to Connecticut schools. This is also available on that. Now, a call out of information for schools that are already using CAI. So you guys, you're administering other tests using the CAI system. So there are a few things to be aware of. First thing to know of is, depending on the operating system that is on your student devices, you will install one of the applications below. So the CB Secure Browser, and this is for students to take the test, right? These are student testing applications. The CB Secure Browser is used on devices that are running Windows or Mac OS. It does not replace state testing browsers, so both can be installed on the same device. So you can have your secure browser for NGSS on student devices, and then you can also have the CB secure browser on those devices. Students will need to use the CB secure browser to take the SAT. And then the secure test browser. This is the application that is used on Chromebooks and iPads. So if your school is already using, if you already have them on your iPad, this app on your iPads for your other assessments, you don't need to download a new app in that case. You just need to change the organization and assessment settings in the secure test browser so students can access the test. Okay, so depending on the device you're using, and you may need to do something a little bit different. So for Windows and Mac OS operating devices, you need to install the CB secure browser on those devices. And for iPads and Chromebooks, you can use the secure test browser you have. You just need to change the organization and assessment settings so that before students are able to take the SAT in that app. So with this, I'm going to turn it over to Julie to talk about some best practices for preparing schools and the technology they need to test.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Julie Kunzelman. I'm a tech integration specialist at Enfield High School. Last year, we implemented the digital SAT using iPads. And we had some pretty darn good success, I would say, based upon the feedback I was reading from everyone. So I just kind of put together like a few bullet points of things to keep in mind as you're getting ready. I can tell you, after sitting through all of the webinars last year for a first timer, I was worried. I was kind of overwhelmed. And it wasn't until we actually got our access credentials and we could go in there and push the buttons and really start to feel it out, that kind of just melted away. So hang in there. It's going to be just fine. The most important thing I wrote down to tell you was whatever you can do in advance, as much as you can do in advance to prepare, the better off you will feel on actual test day. So some of the things that we did was the pre-administration in advance for the entire group of students that we're going to be testing. So we pulled them from classes for about 20 to 30 minutes. We had them go through the whole pre-administration process in advance. We were able to weed out device problems by doing that, see who needed to do software updates or who had other issues going on. We came across some keyboard issues. So down the road, if anybody has a problem with student names that include apostrophes, you're going to want to reach out to me. I have the directions on how to fix that problem. And it also, it decreases the amount of time the kids spend doing this whole process on actual test day, because it does take up a lot of time and they're already sitting there for so long taking those tests that just one thing off their plate. So consider doing that in advance. A really good idea is to keep an extra master copy of all test tickets on hand. You never know when you need another one. And it's so much faster to just pull out an alphabetical one than have to go into the system and print one out on the fly. A good thing for the pre-administration would be to let the kids know, and I'm assuming this is still the case, that they can send scores up to 4 schools. Is that still the case? Do we know? Yes. Okay. So they do get to pick 4 schools to send their scores to, but they have to know right at that moment if they're going to take advantage of that. So give them a heads up to bring a list of their top schools that they can send those scores to. And there's the practice test built into the app for the iPad, and I'm assuming it's built into any of the versions the kids have. You're going to want to run that on the device the kids use. So I pulled like 5 random iPads from our kids and we ran the test just to make sure the whole process would work from start to finish before we actually gave that out to the kids to do. Come test day, whether you use Chromebooks or you use iPads, have extras, have like an entire cart of extras. You know those kids are not going to come prepared. Have a box after box of extra chargers on hand. They never charge them the night before, no matter how many times you tell them to. That saved us a lot. For all those districts using iPads, they freeze up sometimes, and they can freeze up in the middle of the test, and that's okay. Don't freak out. It's actually really easy to fix. Just force shut it down, turn it back on, log back in, done. Easy peasy. You do not need to hand out extra devices. We learned that through trial and error. And it was so much simpler to just restart. Takes just as much time as starting up a new device anyway. PD, hold PD for your staff. 2 different sessions. One to get them access to their account and one to actually practice the test administration, and then do it in small groups. Do not take your entire staff of 250 people or however many you have in your district and try to do it all in the same room at the same time, because you will not get their attention. Break them into bunches, go to content area meetings, whatever you have to do, get them into small groups. They'll ask more questions, they'll be better prepared. The quick start guide that Adrienne mentioned, that is gold. Have it, don't lose it, have extra copies on hand. Our teachers loved it. It was really, really helpful. Adrienne, can you go back 1 slide for a second? You said something on there and I wanted to reiterate that. Yep, and I can't remember what in the world it was now. Sorry, never mind.
Did it have to do with like the secure like how there's a secure browser for NGSS versus that there's you have to toggle to the other one? Did it have to do with that?
Jeez, I don't even remember anymore.
Okay, because I know that's something
that
so that was a little tricky for some. Maybe it's a Chromebook thing and it's not an Mac thing.
Yeah, I'll think of it as soon as this webinar is over, I'm sure. But in any case, anybody can feel free to reach out to me at any time if you have any questions, especially once you start going, because that's really when all the questions will come up for real. It's not until you do it that you're gonna have the questions. So rely on each other, help each other out, breathe, and prepare in advance. I think that's about it.
So Julie, I put your email into the chat. So if people wanted to get in touch with you, they could. Would you mind sharing with me that list that you just went through, and I can share it with the group? And then
Absolutely.
I'd also like to ask if there are anyone on the webinar now that worked with Chromebooks or desktops, and you have any suggestions that you wouldn't mind sharing, if you could just use the raise your hand feature, and I can unmute you if you wouldn't mind sharing with the group. Thank you.
Hi, I'm also with Enfield Public Schools. My suggestion, if you are using an iPad, that you won't be able to just simply restart the iPad from there because it will be locked down. But holding the lock button and the home button for 10 plus seconds will get you to fully restart, and then you can rejoin the test and be back in action.
Thank you. All right, we have someone else that wanted to comment. Hold on. It jumped around. Let me unmute you, Eileen. All right, Eileen, go ahead. You should be able to use your mic and your camera. Let me see. I don't know why that's not working because. All right, I'll come back to you. Let me try Ashley. Allow mic. Ashley, can you unmute and talk? All right, maybe I'll make you guys presenters instead. Maybe that'll help.
Now I can unmute.
Okay, go ahead.
This is Ashley. One of the things that we ran into was Mac systems have a lot of hidden embedded settings that need to be turned off. So making sure to run that pre-test was incredibly helpful because there are just so many different features on the Mac to turn off that some people forget about.
Thanks.
Hi.
Hi, Eileen, go ahead.
We had an issue where when on the Chromebooks, we used Chromebooks for all our kids, and when they went in, they had to go to a drop down that had a list of states, and College Board was up the top. So they had to not select Connecticut, they had to select College Board to do the SATs. And that was confusing because a lot of the kids went in and automatically, I think there was another test they took, maybe the science test, that they had to pick Connecticut. So instead of picking Connecticut for the SAT, they had to pick College Board in order to get to the right sign-in screen. So just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you. That was definitely tricky last year, and we got a lot of feedback on that. So when you use NGSS, I think it's a Chromebook thing where you
Yes.
toggle, and so you have to choose College Board. Yeah,
we had a lot of the kids that picked the wrong thing, and we had to run to each individual kid and restart the whole test. It was it was a glitch. Let's just put it that way for a lot of kids.
That's what it was that I tried to remember before. The iPad does the same thing. You have to go back to the main menu screen and choose that version of the test versus the Connecticut. So it makes a big difference. And there is a test that kids have already done that put them in Connecticut. So they're not going to listen to directions. So you have to preemptively tell them that.
Right.
Yes, I wanted to jump in to actually say the same thing. The easiest, fastest way, just have your students look at the top left of their screen. If it says anything but College Board, they are in the wrong version of it. So they have to go back. If it says Connecticut, they have to go back and choose College Board. Usually that's the easiest way. And one more thing I wanted to kind of piggyback on what Julie mentioned earlier. Your best practices that you mentioned, they're also very helpful and very true. There was one thing you mentioned about there being a student test preview version in the devices. And when you do choose to do that, please make sure that you are in the practice one. if you choose to test out your devices that way instead of being in the actual operational version of it, because we've seen some test out their devices doing it that way and accidentally using an actual student's registration number and an actual test, or it won't be available at the time, but an actual questionnaire version or option for the student. So they would use that opportunity. So just be very cautious that if you test out your devices that way, to make sure that you are in the test preview version of it.
All right, thank you everyone for jumping in on that. We have a question in, oh wait, I think Alec has his hand up, so hold on for a second. All right, Alec, go ahead.
Hi, folks. Just wanted to add two little pieces that we kind of ran into and wanted to make sure everybody's aware. So one, if you are choosing a high density test setting like a gym and you are having, let's say, 50 to 100 kids, I'm not advising it, but let's say if you're forced into it, I would not recommend having multiple access points in that large space, because what will end up happening is you'll have a number of Chromebooks jumping between one and the other, and you're going to have a lot of glitchiness between, especially, higher bandwidth items. So we recommend a high density single access point versus multiple ones. And the other thing is, especially with Chromebooks, if you don't have a version limit cap set in your settings, they're going to continue to update to whatever the newest version is. And with stability, you don't necessarily want the newest version if College Board or, for example, SBAC and GSS haven't yet approved it and tested it. So, for example, in GSS, SBAC, they release their approved versions, and it's usually one or two versions behind the very newest one, and they add it on. But I would select a cap. So we're at like 105 now. That might be a good cap, or 104. It'll still be stable throughout. You just don't necessarily want a version to come out right before the test, and neither College Board or Cambium has really had a test, an ability to make sure that it's going to work flawlessly when you have the test coming up. That's about it.
Thanks, Alec. Appreciate that. I think there were a couple of things in the chat, but I don't know if we want to wait and handle those at the end. So it's up to you.
Why don't we handle all the questions at the end? I think it'll make it easier. So it looks like we don't have anybody else that raised their hand to share anything. So I'll just call out, I know we saw some people put in the chat some of their own best practices as well. So I think what we can make sure that we can do is grab anything that went in the chat as well. And, I know Michelle said she'll share Julie's best practices. We'll add in things that came in from the chat as well, so that you kind of get a compilation of all the best practices that were shared.
Absolutely. And I believe I also have some things from last year that we kind of like compiled, and so we looked through that. Thanks.
Awesome. Great. So we're gonna keep moving on. So give me a second. We just talked about that one. Okay, let's talk about tech readiness now. As I mentioned, we have kind of a checklist of steps that you can go through to make sure that you are ready, that you've done all of the steps needed to make sure that you technologically are ready to give the test on test day. And that's in the digital preparedness step-by-step guide within the deck itself. When you either download that or access it on the website, you'll be able to see. I'm sorry, this keeps popping ahead. You'll be able to see that. But there are a number of different steps to take. We walk you through those steps that you need to make sure you take to make sure that the schools are technologically ready to give that test. Please use this tool. It'll make things, I think, easier for you, and you can make sure that you've kind of checked off all of those points. As I mentioned, there is a step-by-step guide on the digital testing portal. So in that digital preparedness tab, you can go into the step-by-step guide, and that's where you can access that information. Technical readiness. So for test devices and requirements, second here, test devices and requirements and specifications. First call out, well, there are a bunch of things to know here about the devices that students are using. First thing that'll call out that you'll see on the side of the screen there is if you visit the digital testing portal, you'll be able to always see the most up-to-date information on device requirements there, including the supported operating systems. So you're going to want to make sure that all devices meet the system requirements and tech specs that are outlined in the step-by-step guide that I talked about in the previous slide. You can also, schools need to have the ability to install the secure browser client application on all testing devices. As we talked about here, desktops, laptops, iPads, and Chromebooks are allowed. You'll see that there are some restrictions on the specific iPads that are allowed. So iPads that have a 9.7-inch display, they have to be 4th generation or higher. You can't use iPad minis. The devices have to be able to connect to the internet. It can be a wired connection or a wireless connection, but they must be able to connect to the internet, and they must be school owned. So I know that some schools, some schools have students use their personal devices. The devices used for testing, the devices used for College Board SAT testing must be school owned. If you have any questions or problems with that, let Michelle know. We can kind of talk you through that. But they must be school owned. Devices must maintain a charge for at least 5 hours, or you need to have them plugged in to a reliable power source that actually provides power. Each testing room has to have a dedicated device for the proctors because they're going to need to have their own device to oversee what's happening in the testing room. And then students that are testing with approved assistive technology devices, you really need to make sure that those students pre-test those devices with the secure browser using the student digital test preview mode before test A. And that's to make sure that they're clear on how it functions, that everything's functioning well using that assistive technology device. For technical readiness, you're going to want to make sure you are clear on the supported operating systems. As I said, the digital testing portal will always have the most updated information about the device requirements and the supported operating systems. Alex, is there anything you want to say about operating systems?
Not at this time, but so the sites or the links that shared in this deck will take you to where you will find the most up-to-date information on support operating systems. So if you have any questions, definitely go back to our microsite, which should have the latest and greatest, and then everything that you will need.
Awesome, thanks. So then technical readiness, the idea of, for your test devices, guidance for determining bandwidth. So you'll see there's a lot of information up here for you to use as you're looking at the number of students you'll have and what you need to consider in terms of bandwidth. We provide a network diagnostic tool that you can use to make sure your school has the bandwidth to support the number of students that you expect to test at the same time. And so you can access the diagnostic tool through the digital test preview link that's in the digital testing portal. We do recommend you run the diagnostic tool ahead of test day in different rooms, so the different rooms that you're going to be using for testing, just to make sure that the bandwidth requirements can be met within those rooms. We also want to make sure, and this is something that some schools kind of learned the hard way last year, we recommend doing a pre-administration session, not only to give the students the opportunity to request their score sends, but also to give to have kind of all of the devices operating kind of on your system at the same time, because it gives you an insight into how things are going to operate for you on test day. So that's another kind of reason you may want to do that. We actually really recommend you doing the pre-administration session, and to kind of set it up with the pre-administration happening if you can, so that it mimics what will happen on test day. Roughly the number of kids in the different rooms on test, that you'll have on test day. Try that out in the pre-administration session, so you can just get that window into how things will run technically on test day for your schools. There is more information about network configuration on the digital testing portal to be able to kind of support you to make sure that you are, you understand the bandwidth needs and that you've got kind of the appropriate URLs, whitelisted and whatnot. And so do check out that information on the digital testing portal. We do also have a bunch of information for you to support securing the downloading and installing the secure browser on your students' testing devices. So if you look on the digital testing portal, there are directions for installing it on the different types of devices that are supported, so that you can make sure that you've got the directions and the information you need to make sure you're installing that correctly. And then there are technology guides available on the digital testing portal. There are PDFs available for the different supported operating systems, and so if you find that you need that, there are technology guides available on the digital testing portal for you to use. Now we do have a couple, as I mentioned, we have some kind of FAQ information here to support some of the common questions that people ask when we're talking about digital testing. So. We often hear a question, and this will come in from test coordinators, but sometimes test coordinators may go to you as a tech coordinator to ask about that. If a classroom or a school has lost internet access, kind of what should they do? So, it happens, right? It'll happen where the internet may dip and they lose it. It could be a whole school outage or an individual classroom. The thing to remember is that the amount of time that has been lost is what really determines the next steps. So if the class or the school has lost it for 5 minutes or less for any particular section, the school or the class, sorry about that, keep jumping. The school or the class can actually resume testing. There's kind of a buffer built into the CAI testing portal for SAT so that students and schools can kind of resume testing if just a few minutes have been lost. And this way they won't lose any testing time. Now, if it's more than 5 minutes, though, the class or school really is going to need to start testing again on another day, because if it's more than 5 minutes, those students will have lost testing time. And so you can have them continue, but then those kids will have lost testing time and they're going to be eligible for a makeup. So it's worth kind of really looking at the testing time and determining what to do. If a school's not sure what to do, they can call us on test day and we'll kind of talk them through it. Another kind of common question, and Aixa, you added this one. Do you want to talk about this one?
Yes, absolutely. Let me my camera there. Yes, of course. So as it was mentioned earlier by Julie, I did add this straight from the tech guide. So this is some of the questions that we see come up often, or issues, I guess, that we've seen. So this is about timing mismatch, which may be preventing the proctor from approving a student into the testing session. What it really means is, so when
sorry,
it's okay. No worries. So on test day, and this is true for only test, most likely you will not get this for the questionnaire option, but for the actual test on test day, if a proctor starts a session, provides a session ID, advises the students to enter their name, registration number, and session ID as instructed and as they see on their test ticket. If they do receive an error, if the educator receives an error of a mismatch in the TA interface, it will most likely be due to a student not having the appropriate timing accommodations and settings in affiliated with their registration number. What that means is if I am a proctor administering or starting a session for students with 50% extended time, it is expected that all the students in that room trying to be approved into the session must have those settings already added in timed. So if I get an error, it's because there's a student that one should not be in that room, or two should be in that room, but their settings have not been properly added in Tide. So the TA interface will tell me exactly what student that is. I can either, as a proctor, I can check quickly in Tide if settings have been added. If they have not, then the proctor must reach out to the test coordinator to add those right away. If it does take more than 5 minutes to try to resolve this issue, we do highly recommend that just kind of, if time and availability allows, to just pull the student and then have them test in a separate room so it doesn't continue to affect the other students. But that's ultimately what it is. A mismatch error is just mainly because a student may not have the correct settings in Tide for which session the student is trying to be approved into. So all of that to say that.
Great, thank you. And you added this one too, so I'm going to ask you to stay on and talk through this one.
Yes, absolutely. So other common issues that we've seen as a student can sign into the secure browser. Common error messages are the session is not available for testing. So some of the steps, and again, this is highlighted step by steps on the quick start guide. So the proctor should make sure that they've entered the session ID shown in the T interface as shared by the proctor. So that may be, sometimes they forget that last number to be added in there, because usually it's like 4 letters numbers and then an extra number. So it could be simple as that. The proctor should make sure that the correct version of the T interface, they have the correct version of T interface and the student is using the correct secure browser. So as that's one of the things that was mentioned by Julie, just make sure that they have the correct versions in there, and these issues can be prevented on test day if you choose to do the pre-administration ahead of time. So this is one of the errors that could be kind of fixed ahead of test day. The other one would be first name is not correct or registration number is not formatted properly. So the students are advised to enter the name, their first name, and the registration number exactly as they see it in their test tickets. We've seen sometimes students enter their nickname instead of their actual given name or as printed in the test ticket. The other thing we've seen is that their keyboard is not properly set up to account for apostrophes, for example. And I believe Julie has shared her documents in the chats for that. So that's another common error that we've seen. Another one is students not adding the leading zeros in their registration numbers. So they're just, enter only the other numbers that they see and not the leading zeros. So that's another very common misstep that we see that will cause an error for the student to get an error to not be allowed into the session. The other one, common error messages that we see is no test available. And that really is maybe you have a student entering the incorrect registration number. And I did want to mention this specifically for your makeup, because if you do have students that were not able to test in the primary testing window and they're testing in the makeup testing window, just make sure that you are printing the correct test ticket and that is the registration number for that makeup administration. So you will see no test available because perhaps the student is using a test ticket with a registration number from their primary. So that can be easily fixed. So I did, that's more true. We see more of this no test available errors during the makeup sessions.
So Aisa, for the test tickets, do all the March dates have the same test ticket and the April have a different?
Correct.
Okay, so if you do a makeup, like say the student misses your first March date and you set up a second March date within those dates, they would use that March test ticket. But then when you go, if they just don't test until the April dates, that's when you have to print a different test ticket. So just to be clear on that.
Thank you, Michelle. Yes, and that's correct. And a quick way to see it, the test ticket itself should tell you what administration that test ticket is for.
Great. Thank you, Aixa, for letting me put you on the spot there.
Of course.
So we have a couple other common issues that you may hear of from your test coordinators. They may say, I can't see all of my students in TIDE. So the first thing that they need to do is understand, and what everybody should understand is how kids' information gets into TIDE for SAT. So what happens is CSDE provides College Board with the student registration information. And then, so they'll pull the information, they'll pull the student data from PSIS, and then they provide that to College Board, and then they upload it to us, and then we put it into TIDE. So districts do have to make sure that the student information is accurate in PSIS and that those students are in PSIS. Once those students are in PSIS, then when CSDE pulls that information and gives it to us, then they will show up in TIDE. So that's a pretty common thing that comes up where people are like, I can't see all my kids in TIDE, and it's typically because those students weren't in PSIS, and therefore CSDE couldn't provide us with the student information because they weren't in the system that CSDE pulls from. The other thing, kind of similarly related, is I see all of my students in TIDE for the makeup test date in April. Do I have to retest all my students? The answer is no. What happens for makeup testing is that CSDE pulls us a whole file, right? A whole new file, and it has all the kids in it, and they upload it into our system, and then we put it into TIDE for you to see. That's because we don't know, nor does CSDE know, who needs the test, who might have been absent, who had an irregularity. So we make sure that all kids are in the system so that your schools are able to test the kids that need to be tested. Just because they see them there, though, doesn't mean that they have to test them. The other thing to know is that students in their own College Board account will see a registration for April. If they should go in there, if they're signing up for another SAT date or something, they go in there, they're going to see a registration for the April test date. They only are going to use that registration if they need a makeup. If they're not testing in that April makeup test date, once the test date passes, that registration is going to fall out of their account and they're not going to see it anymore. Okay, so that's just some common questions we got last year about seeing students in TIDE. Now, as I mentioned, there's kind of there's the process of districts updating PSIS, CSDE pulls from CSIS and gives it to College Board, and then College Board will update the information in TIDE. There is a kind of schedule that is used by CSDE for when they're going to submit new student information to College Board. So this is really to support students that are new to your school, they've transferred in, and you need to make sure that they get into TIDE. So for each of the dates here, you need to make sure that PSIS is accurate by the date in that first column on the screen, so that then when CSDE pulls the information, they're getting the most updated information that your district has to then give to us. And
I'm just going to jump in there real quick. Because I did just send an email out, but I did not include tech coordinators in this email. I sent it to district test coordinators, SSD coordinators, and we sent it to PSIS coordinators. So I don't know how much you get into the weeds on this in terms of registration, but the bottom line is you can't register students. You can't add them into TIDE. It's only done through a bulk upload that we handle through PSIS registration. And if people have questions about why kids are missing, they can certainly reach out to me. We can figure it out. And another difference is that we don't do a nightly upload to TIDE like is done with our other programs, our Smarter 3 through 8 and NGSS. There's a nightly upload push that's done into TIDE. We're not able to do that with the College Board, so that's why we have this schedule. If we find that we need to add some more files in there because kids can't test if they're not in TIDE, we'll figure something out. But we think that based on last year, this should be enough files. But obviously, feel free to reach out. And if you're really interested in seeing that email that I sent out last week, I'm happy to forward it to you. Just let me know. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks. And okay, so we can take any questions now. So we'll go through and we'll just leave we're going to leave the contact information up on the screen so that you guys, if you're new and you don't know contact information, you have the time to kind of jot that down. But let's see here.
You can also raise your hand too if you prefer to ask your question, and we can unmute you.
Sorry, you know what? I'm going to go back up to the beginning and just look through questions that way. Okay. Rosetta had a question. What version of the secure browser is the one we should be using for this school year? Asa, do you know the version for this year for the secure browser?
So it depends on the devices that you're using. So I did share the link on there of which one it should be. I know we recently updated the version, the links for iPads. There was a new version released. I believe it's 15.5. I'm sorry, not for iPads, for MacBooks running on Mac OS 13. There was just recently a new version that was updated. The link has been updated in there. So if you're using MacBooks, please be aware of that. And the version is 15.5. The other ones, so for iPad should be 15. For secure browser should still be version 8. But again, if there are any changes just ahead of your administration, just take a look at our website. It should tell you. It will have the latest and greatest. If any updates should be there, it will be posted there. If it's very close to the administrations, we ensure to make to put a banner on our websites just to make sure that we drive you to what you need to be doing. But version 8 for Chromebook should be the latest, and then 15.0 for iPads and 15.5 for MacBooks running on Mac OS 13.
Great. Alec, I see you had a question that I'm going to address here. Can you explain the role of Bluebook again, please? So, Bluebook is the student digital testing app for the new digital SAT. So that's not what you use for the current SAT, Connecticut SAT school day. Okay, Bluebook is the student digital testing app for the new digital SAT that will be kind of used in schools starting in the fall. Okay, so you for the current Connecticut SAT school day, there is no role for Bluebook in our testing. Okay, we will talk. We will have webinars and all sorts of stuff start in like the May-June timeframe. So once we get through all of the spring Connecticut SAT school day, we'll then start doing webinars to provide you with information that you need to know for all the system stuff you're going to need to know to support the new digital SAT that will be available, the digital PSAT available in the fall, and then the digital SAT available to schools in the spring. Okay, so we'll cover all that stuff for you once we get through this. Once we get through this administration. Okay.
There's one about, is there a tech troubleshooting document for proctors during testing? Would that be the quick start guide that we shared? Okay, so Abby, we did share a link to the quick start guide in the chat. So.
And you should also get that like actual printouts in your digital shipment that you receive closer to test date. But if you would like more or access to it now, then you can follow the link.
Also, this is a good segue to say that we have some online training available. There's a proctor training that all the proctors should go through. It's about 45 minutes. Maybe it's a little less than that. And we'll be releasing that in a couple weeks, like beginning of February or so. There's also a training about TIDE, and there's a training for test coordinators. I just actually went through the TIDE training and the test coordinator training, and they're very well done. Lots of information about troubleshooting, and you can kind of do it at your own pace. And we're going to make it so much easier. You don't need an account to log in this year. It's just going to be a link that you're going to use. So more information will follow, and I will make sure that tech coordinators get that information, so you know when those sessions, they're not sessions, but when the trainings are released, you can do them on your own.
There's a question here. Can the app be installed on a district-owned, non-managed MacBook or Windows-based laptop? Or to reword it, so devices we add to the network have to be and have the admin password for, but not manage. Okay, so I guess the question is, as long as the device is school-owned, that's okay, right?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, so I hope that answers your question, Sean. They have to be owned by the school or district, and in order to be used for the Connecticut SAT school day testing. Travis had a question: is the practice test available yet? The page doesn't appear to be loading, so just double checking. It should be available, right? Ready, sir?
Yes. So like on the devices, to go through the student test previews, yes, those should be available.
Okay. Already. Any? We have like 2 minutes left here together.
Did you see the one about the apostrophe troubleshooting info?
Yes, I think Julie up. Was that asking for the guide?
I don't.
I
I
think it
believe
was.
Julie shared the file.
Oh, did she?
Yeah,
I couldn't
dropped
open
the
it.
file in there.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so there's a good question here. Should we be able to sign into the College Board Tide system now, or do we need to be added again? That's a great question. You will be added again for this school year. So you'll be able to do so. Access starts on the 8th, I think. Did we say, or the 7th? I can't remember. 7th. Okay, great. So starting on February 7th, you will have access and be able to sign into College Board's Tide again.
Just a little to piggyback off of that, it will be access provided to the test coordinators. And if you're not assigned test coordinator and you're the tech coordinator, then I'll work with your test coordinator to ensure that they give you access as soon as they do.
Great, thank you for that.
And yes, everybody will need to be re-added again for the upcoming administration. So you will not have access to that just yet, unless your school participated in the fall for PSAT 8-9. You may have an account there now through the end of January. But if not, for the spring administrations, for the SAT, it will be access will be added again on February 7th.
So yeah, Lisa, you would have to add everybody, all the proctors in again, and anyone who needs access to administer the test or to oversee the test in the 2 different roles that you have, proctor and whatever that other one is. That gives you more access. Yeah. So there is a way to do a bulk upload of them, and that's described in the manuals and also in the Tide training.
Great. So, should you have any questions going forward, if something pops up that you haven't asked today, feel free to reach out. Michelle's always available to answer questions. If she can't answer it, we'll answer it. You can also contact us at College Board directly if you'd like. There's our phone number and our email address there. So, thank you. Michelle, anything you want to say to wrap us up?
Just thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, definitely follow up, and I will send the supporting documents that we mentioned during the call to those of you that joined. So thanks a lot. Have a great day.
Thank you.